Suppressing one anger episode takes between 21 and 42% more prefrontal cortex energy than simply acknowledging it, which means every time you swallow something that should have had a voice, your brain pays a measurable cognitive tax. Multiply that by 30 days. Multiply it by every small moment you smiled through, every boundary you did not name, every room you kept peaceful at your own expense. And what accumulates is not patience. It is not maturity. It is something the body stores in ways that will surprise you. This video covers exactly what happens inside you across 30 days of suppressed anger, physiologically, psychologically, neurologically. And number 4 is the one nobody talks about because it looks nothing like anger when it finally surfaces. Because here is the frame you have probably been carrying. Anger is the problem. Anger is the thing that makes relationships difficult, makes you someone hard to be around, makes you the version of yourself you are least proud of. So you got good at not showing it. You got good at breathing through it, at reframing it, at finding the generous interpretation, at being the bigger person. And from the outside, that reads as emotional maturity. It reads as self-control. But what it actually is, what the science is very clear about, is not regulation, it is suppression. And those two things use entirely different neural machinery and produce entirely different outcomes over time. You were not managing your anger, you were relocating it. Dr. James Gross at Stanford University has studied emotion regulation strategies for over 25 years, and his research draws a precise and important line between reappraisal, genuinely changing how you interpret a situation, and suppression, inhibiting the emotional response after it has already been generated. In one of his foundational studies, participants who used suppression as their primary strategy showed significantly elevated sympathetic nervous system activation throughout the suppression period, reduced memory for the events surrounding the suppressed emotion, and higher rates of cardiovascular stress response than participants who expressed or reappraised the same emotions. The body, in other words, did not receive the signal that the threat was resolved. It just received the signal that talking about it was not allowed. Picture the last 30 days of your life. Think about how many times something happened, a comment that dismissed you, a situation where your needs were treated as inconvenient, a moment where someone took something from you that you did not give, and your immediate internal response was real and hot and valid, and then, within seconds, the management system kicked in. Not now, not here, not worth it. And the moment passed, and you moved on, and you were fine. Except somewhere in the biology of you, nothing moved on at all. 2 of the 5 things I'm about to describe will feel physical, because they are. One of them will feel like something else entirely, something you would never connect to anger without this specific piece of information. That one is number 4. Do not skip to it. The sequence matters. The first thing that happens is called amygdala sensitization. The amygdala, your brain's primary threat detection and emotional tagging center, operates on a prediction model. It is constantly updating its forecast of how dangerous the environment is based on what you have recently experienced. When anger signals are generated and then suppressed repeatedly, the amygdala does not learn that the situations were safe. It learns that the situations were threatening enough to require active suppression. The threat register goes up, not down. After several weeks of consistent suppression, the amygdala's baseline activation level elevates, meaning smaller and smaller triggers begin producing the same sized response that previously required a significant provocation. This is why, after a long period of being fine, something genuinely minor, a tone of voice, a slight inconvenience, someone chewing too loudly, produces a reaction that feels disproportionate and confusing and embarrassing. You are not overreacting to the small thing. You are finally reacting to 30 days of things the amygdala had been keeping a running count of without your permission. The second thing that happens is called cortisol accumulation. Every suppressed anger episode is a stress event the body processes without resolution. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is released when the threat response activates, and it is metabolized when the threat is resolved. Expression, even partial expression, is one of the primary resolution pathways. When expression is consistently blocked, cortisol levels do not return fully to baseline between events. They layer. Over 30 days, chronic cortisol elevation disrupts sleep architecture, specifically reducing slow-wave and REM sleep quality without necessarily reducing hours. It elevates systemic inflammation markers. It gradually impairs hippocampal function, which affects memory consolidation and emotional context processing. The physical feeling of this is a tiredness that sleep does not fix, a body that feels older than it should, a low-grade unease that you cannot locate in any specific source. That is not stress in the way people usually use the word. That is accumulated cortisol with nowhere to go. Here is where I want to stop and say something directly to you. If you have spent the last month or the last year or longer being the peaceful one, the unbothered one, the one who does not make things difficult, this is what that cost. Not because you are weak, not because you handled it wrong, because the biology was never designed for indefinite containment. The container was never meant to be permanent. The third thing is called emotional blunting. This one is counterintuitive and important. The suppression system in the brain is not surgical. When the prefrontal cortex learns to inhibit emotional responses, specifically the expression and processing of anger, it does not inhibit only anger. The same neural pathways that dampen threat-based emotional responses also affect the positive affect system over time. Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, whose neuroscientific research on emotion and the brain spans 3 decades, found in longitudinal imaging studies that chronic emotional suppression was associated with reduced activation in the left prefrontal cortex, the region most associated with approach motivation, positive anticipation, and the felt experience of joy. What this means in practice is that after extended periods of suppression, people do not just feel less anger, they feel less of everything. The highs get quieter. The things that used to generate genuine excitement produce a muted version of it. The emotional range compresses. And because the anger was the intended target of the suppression, this collateral flattening is almost never connected to it. People think they are becoming more mature, more even-keeled. What is actually happening is that the dimmer was turned down on the whole board. The fourth thing, the one I flagged, is called somatic displacement, and this is the piece that changes how you understand your own body. Anger that is never processed verbally or emotionally does not disappear. It is metabolically real. It exists as hormonal activity, as muscular tension, as nervous system activation, and it roots somewhere. In the research literature on alexithymia and somatization, suppressed emotional content consistently reemerges as physical symptoms that have no identifiable medical cause. Chronic tension in the jaw, neck, and shoulders, gastrointestinal disturbance, persistent headaches, fatigue that does not map to activity level. The body expresses what the mind was not allowed to. This is not metaphorical. This is a well-documented clinical phenomenon. The nervous system finding an alternate output channel for energy that was generated but never discharged. If you have been carrying any unexplained physical tension for the last month, it is worth asking what emotion it might be holding on behalf of. The fifth thing is the one that changes relationships. It is called proximity withdrawal. When anger toward a specific person is suppressed repeatedly, the nervous system develops an unconscious avoidance gradient. A quiet pull away from closeness with that person that is never articulated and often never consciously recognized. You do not decide to create distance. You just find yourself slightly less interested in reaching out, slightly less present in the interactions you do have, slightly more relieved when plans get cancelled. The warmth does not disappear all at once. It cools slowly, in increments, in a way that is invisible from the outside and confusing from the inside. You still care about the person, but something in the body has begun treating proximity to them as a low-level stressor. And the relationship begins eroding from the inside before either person has named a single problem. You were not fine for 30 days. You were managing, which is a different thing entirely, and a harder one. The depletion you feel is real, The physical cost is real, and the quiet distance growing in the places that should feel closest is real. None of it means you are too sensitive or too angry or too much. It means you have been carrying something biological in a container that was only ever designed to be temporary. The part this video did not cover is what to do with it, not in a prescriptive way, not a list of steps, but the specific psychological understanding of why expression feels more dangerous than suppression for people who built this pattern. Because without that piece, knowing all of this still will not make the anger feel safe to have. That is where the real work lives. And if any of this felt true, that next part is not optional. It is the reason this one mattered.